He walked out in the gray light and stood, and he saw for a brief moment the absolute truth of the world. The cold, relentless circling of the intestate earth. Darkness implacable. The blind dogs of the sun in their running. The crushing black vacuum of the universe. And somewhere 200 animals trembling like ground foxes in their cover. Borrowed time and borrowed world and borrowed eyes with which to sorrow it.
And lo, for the earth was empty of form, and void, and darkness was all over the face of the deep, and we said, "Look at that fucker dance."
Yeah, welcome to Heat Death of the Universe. We are in Seoul, South Korea. You probably aren't. It is February 15th, 2021, 9:52, freshly 52, I just saw it change, p.m. Korea Standard Time. That's the time part.
You got it. What's time? If anything, I've found out recently that every event that's happened in the past 100 or so years, 200 or so years, is connected and has led up to the crisis that is today.
It does seem that way.
It all started with the opium conspiracy that may have just been a conspiracy.
Opium?
Yeah, the British Opium War on China.
Oh, yeah.
I guess that's not where it really started, but just...
Yeah, I think probably have to go back further than that. But we don't in the movie. What movie, you may ask?
The same one we talked about last time.
Yes.
Because we can't get it out of our head.
We cannot. We talked about the first 3 episodes or installations, whatever, volumes in the 6-part documentary. And we're going to talk about the last 3 today. And the best place to start, I guess, is at the beginning.
Not sure you don't want to do from the very end?
We could do something wacky like that.
I have noticed that he likes to do that aim that I've suddenly forgotten. Quentin Tarantino does a lot where he tells the story from a lot of different years and not in chronological order.
Non-linear storytelling, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I was thinking there was a different name. Non-linear is correct. That is what I'm getting at. If we were more engineering, we could have just made a linear history of everything he said. But it would have probably showed the connections near as well.
Yeah, and it's a lot of effort.
Watching this Adam Curtis movie is a bit like watching someone like up at the detective's like blackboard posting pictures and streams and connecting all these events together to get to the final destination. I think that's part of why I like his movies so much.
Definitely part of the style. It does. So episode 4 does start in a place I didn't quite expect. It starts with Doctors Without Borders, the I guess charity group, humanitarian group that just goes around the world and gives people medical care who need it.
I was also surprised they started that he started there, mainly because Doctors Without Borders is something that I never think of as like, I mean, well, I really don't think about it much because it's just not something that's been relevant to my life. Sorry, go ahead.
So it starts in Vietnam, like post-war, I guess, pretty soon thereafter, and there were a lot of refugees who were trying to flee the country because things were understandably horrible at the time there, and the weird thing was that a lot of the like anti-war people on the left at the time were not supportive of the refugees, in the sense that they thought it would be like would be sort of supporting the narrative that what the U.S. was doing there was good somehow. Am I getting that right?
I think so.
Like, that, if we say like conditions are bad there, then it's like, it's tantamount to saying like,
it's the same as
communism
saying, well,
is bad and therefore we need to rescue these kids from like this regime. And, instead of the fact that they're in a war-torn country, and the country was torn apart by the United States in its quest to topple communism.
Yeah, instead of the fact that you're literally just like rescuing them from the U.S. Whatever. Yeah, exactly. It's because we went in there and like fucked everything up, and I kind of get it though. I get why people thought that way, or how they could come to that.
Yeah, but it's also like it's so short-sighted and shallow. Like what the footage that we're watching in the beginning here is like of the guy who founded Doctors Without Borders. I don't have his name handy right in front of me, but it was started in France, and he was basically like, at least in the footage, it's looked like he was like almost single-handedly like helping to rescue these people that were like. They were like taking like basically like rickety thrown together like boats and weird vessels out in the sea and like just dying like because it's incredibly dangerous to try to like sail across the fucking ocean on like a piece of cardboard basically. But he goes into like how Joan Baez, the folk singer, like was one of the few, at least like popular radicals. Like I don't really like that word, but Adam Curtis uses it a lot. I mean, I guess it applies to like 60s and 70s politics. So, and she sort of defied like all of the, and then she kind of like. Unfortunately, like even though she was doing the right thing and saying like we should care for these refugees, it also caused her to sort of like take a really centrist political position in a way. She was like, I'm not. She like very clearly said she's not on the left. She's not. I don't know. Maybe her point was just that this transcends politics and like we should just help people. But anyway, some of this ends up coming back. I mean, the Joan Baez stuff doesn't really, but it also illustrates like a sort of infighting on the left too, like people arguing about like what it looks like to be saving refugees when that seems like something people should be able to agree on. But things were still like highly politically charged at the time that like couldn't even agree on that, even amongst people on the left. then we meet Julia Grant, was a transgender woman in the 70s and 80s, who was, I guess, at least more like out about that than...
Yeah, there was a famous documentary about her actually called A Change of Sex.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Which came out in 1979 on the BBC.
Okay, so maybe that's some of what the footage is from.
Yeah, I think so. Sorry, I was looking her up a bit a minute ago.
No, go ahead. I mean,
so like she was considered like basically a pioneer on like changing public attitude towards trans people. At least when her documentary came out, like it was well received. But there was obviously critics and people who just like refused to accept trans people. Sort of like Americans now being like, why are they putting gay people in Hallmark Christian movies? Apparently the only people that watch Hallmark Christian movies are also the only people who really hate to see gay people in movies.
Yeah, I guess there's a pretty serious overlap there. Yeah, it's interesting that it says that about her because the way Adam Curtis describes her situation is that, like, I think even in the 80s, you know, she was trying to get basically approval through like a psychiatric assessment, like through the NHS. And she wasn't even pushing for like wanting to use the NHS like system. She was willing to like pay her own money to get the full reassignment surgery. And there's some footage of her being grilled by this NHS piece of shit. And like, I don't know, it's just really sad and really fucked up. Like the way he's belittling her and like basically saying like, you're just a confused little person, like, like you have a penis, but what the fuck are you talking about, you know? And I mean, I guess the weird thing is like, trans rights seem like such a sort of recent thing to me. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Like in sort of mainstream culture, if it's even there yet.
I always think of it definitely in like United States as a more recent thing, but I mean it's been like being pushed through, I think, since like at least for a while now. But like I think it's came to more like forefront recently.
I mean, for the longest time, it was like, hey, we're sort of accepting gay people into mainstream culture. And like now it's like largely kind of finished. It feels like, I mean, I'm not saying it's perfect. I mean, there's definitely still a lot of like homophobia, but like, I feel like I heard someone say, I forget where I heard this, but someone somewhere recently said like, the main focus now of like homophobes is focusing on trans people like as an avenue to like condemn all people that are not basically like
I mean, for me, I feel like a lot of that battle started with the bathroom wars.
Yeah, that was like I feel like that was like almost the first like really national attention at all. And yeah, it was like a vicious sort of culture war thing.
To me, I think that shared bathrooms are ridiculous and that every public bathroom should be a single solo bathroom for us people that are a bit pee shy, so we never had to be in a bathroom with other people.
You're fighting your own battle.
But otherwise, I figure, hey, anyone should be able to go whatever fucking bathroom. That's what individual stalls are for. Just get rid of the goddamn urinal. I hate them.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's really concerned about that issue. It's a sort of a cover for being bigoted. That's all I see it as. Like, I don't think anyone believes this shit about like. Maybe some people do. I don't know. It's usually this, and I don't want to get too sidetracked on this, but like, usually the issue here brought up is like it could be a serious issue is like. A trans woman, like attacking a cis woman in the women's bathroom.
I've heard that. I've also heard like it be, I mean, this is where people are just being fucking asses, but I've heard people say, oh, but you let a trans woman in there and they might see like a kid and just decide to take them.
Yeah, I mean that's even more like ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We should probably. I mean, we're on like the second scene here, basically, and there's a lot to talk about. So I mean, like, and as is the style of this film and of his films in general, like these threads kind of come and go like throughout the movie. So, I mean, what ultimately ends up happening to Julia Grant is really sad. She does, I think, quote unquote, illegally get her surgery, which also means that it wasn't done with like the utmost care, the way I understand it, and that I mean, it's terrible. She like collapsed from bleeding, and like the doctors were so, I mean, I guess just so ignorant. I don't know if it was like if it was like a deliberate like thing that the doctors did, but like they assumed there was some sort of miscarriage going on with her. So they just like, I mean, they just mutilated her. And then, yeah, she wasn't able to have sex, and her like long-term boyfriend left her, and it doesn't end well. And I guess we'll kind of get into why how this connects to everything else in a moment. How does it
connect to everything else?
It does, in a way. I mean, it's basically about like he kind of just describes it as like her like radical individualism, like taking on power, and like even though she kind of ultimately got what she wanted, like then she like, I mean, it's basically his way of being. The way I read it was like just in the way that like movements were like failing, political movements, like even these sort of individual movements were getting like are snuffed out as well.
Ground down by the machine.
Basically, yeah. I have a note here that just says Thatcher blabbing about clothes. I think that was just, I don't know, it was something about her going on about femininity or whatever. It tied into the Julia Grant story, but it's not important. Then go ahead.
I was going to say I saw that note when I was reading through your notes. I was like, that's just Thatcher.
Yeah.
I know the part you're talking about.
I think it was to reinforce like just the conservative, like to illustrate rather the conservatism, cultural conservatism in England in the 80s. Then we go back to China, and
how are the students?
Well, I mean, just so Mao is dead, and the new leader, Deng Xiaoping, he's created 3 levels of newspapers that people get based on where they are in like the hierarchy of society, which I thought I'd never heard this part of Chinese history before. I thought it was kind of interesting, kind of insane.
I feel like it's actually brought up in the Third Body Problem, which focuses a lot on some of Chinese history, even though it's about the future. But anyways, that's the only other place I've heard it, but that's maybe the only like truly like Chinese novel I've read. So
Right. Yeah, it was like, so like the first level was just for kind of like the plebes, I guess, or like people, like the lowest people that could actually read.
so that's like you're going to your Google News aggregator and you read the headlines.
And I forget exactly who the second level was for. I mean, you can imagine it just goes up in the, like, you know, the who's in certain powerful parts of society. And like, but like the highest level was like almost this like secretive, super secretive newspaper that like almost nobody got except for like a few people. And
Subscribers only. You have to pay for it. The Patreon feed.
yeah, there was a paywall. That was the problem. No, they mentioned too that the font was like super huge in the highest level newspaper because it was like only like old men were getting it. Who couldn't see very well.
I'm picturing like one kanji per page. It's just like a stack.
But then this goes into how like Xiaoping sort of, I think Curtis describes it as like experimenting with democracy. He's like just a little bit, a little crumb of democracy. Which is they make this thing called the democracy wall, or it gets called that like just by the people, but it's basically a place where like people can just post like information. It's like a physical like message board.
Sure.
It's what today you would call Reddit, a subreddit. But like
Big, like shared whiteboard.
Yeah, it's just that people, it's like a, I don't know, like just people pinning up like whatever. And I guess some of the things, like some of the critics would say, at least of this, were like people were like anonymously like accusing people of crimes and stuff. And like, at least that's the excuse that was given to like shut it down later. But yeah, like it like quickly just gets out of control, like for the leadership in China. Like okay, this was too much, and they start to shut it down. But this also like starts to lead into the student movements, and like, you know, what I think everyone knows about in Tiananmen Square, but all of the student movements that lead up to that. I did kind of skip over also that Jiang Xing, she's put on trial. I forget what the charges were.
Does not end well for her.
No, but she carries on for a while. They don't like immediately execute her, from what I remember. But what I thought was interesting is that she was very like argumentative and like combative against the judges, and like this was another thing I didn't know about Chinese history back then. You would just like sit before this like council of judges that looks like terrifying. But she was just like screaming at them and like saying like, you can never like kill me, like I am like the soul of China. And like, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but ultimately she's sentenced to death, and we meet up with her again later in the movie. But do you remember the thing about the zookeeper guy in China? It like it's around the part of the democracy wall.
No, what happened to the zookeeper?
He was charged with some sort of like I don't know, like I forget what I mean. Like today we would probably call it like espionage, not really espionage, but basically like plotting against the state, something like that. But like all he was really doing was like pushing for the free speech of the wall. Like he wanted to keep that kind of democratic thing going. So this was like, there's like these two poles, I guess, within like the whole movie and within, I think, Adam Curtis's brain of like individualism versus collectivism. And like, as this democracy wall was going, as this zookeeper was becoming like almost sort of a figurehead of this movement, like, so that's individualism like on the rise again, but then like the state very quickly like shuts it down, and they executed the zookeeper and like destroyed the wall. And like then we go into this whole thing about Live Aid. Bob Geldof's Live Aid, which all I knew about it was that, like, I think like as a dumb kid, I just always thought it seemed cheesy, like because I didn't think about the real world shit that they were really trying to help. Or maybe I just like cynically assume like, oh, they say it's all like for the starving people in Africa, but who knows how much of that money is getting, used in a bad way. So
I might sound like a dumb adult here, but when I was a kid, I really thought it was actually the same thing as the Hand Across America thing, or just like the final celebration.
That's not that weird. That's like in the same sort of vein of like 80s, like mass charity sort of movements. I get the connection there.
Yeah, I remember thinking they were just like literally connected. I guess they are connected, but even more literally than like the connection of them being kind of in the same vein.
I mean, you and I were like in diapers, I think, when that happened anyway. Yeah, exactly. So like our memory of it is from like the early 90s, like looking back at it, but I didn't know any of this stuff that he goes into about it, how it's connected to like Ethiopian fascism. And he basically like draws a line between like Live Aid and like the Iraq War, which isn't like kind of wild to think about. And he's not saying like there was anything like intentionally like evil about Live Aid. In fact, he's like giving it a lot of credit because they were actually getting a lot of good things done. So like, they were donating just food to people starving in Ethiopia. That was basically supplies, I'm sure too. But like the fascist group that was in charge in Ethiopia at the time, like they just took all of this food and they would use it as like, they kind of like weaponized the food in a way. And they were just like, one thing that Bob Geldof saw when he went to visit Ethiopia, he's the guy who started Live Aid. He literally saw like these groups of people getting like put into these big trucks that had like that were covered, so you couldn't really see people when they're in there. And yeah, they were just like going off to like to be slaves in like labor camps. Like he even describes it to some representative of Ethiopia as like how much it looks like the cattle cars like in Nazi Germany. Anyway, I mean, the whole point of this, I guess, Adam Curtis is again just showing how like even these good intentioned things just ultimately fail and ultimately end up like, I think one of these stats was like, and I'm not going to get the numbers exactly right, but let's say it was like 500,000 people got like their lives were saved because of the food donations, even though all of this shady stuff was happening. But then Doctors Without Borders, they estimated that that same number of people died because of the food donations.
Really?
Yeah. Because they were basically being, like I said, weaponized against the people by this horrible fascist government. So basically kind of like equaled out to zero. I mean, that sounds really callous, but you know what I mean? Like you save the same number of people that you killed by accident is like, that's kind of how he leaves the whole story from the way I remember it. Then
No, I'm just like, when I think about this documentary, it's so Like at times, I know I messaged you that, man, it's good, but it's like so bleak at times. Like it doesn't leave you much hope for there like being any like feasible way of like making things better.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get to what he says at the very end, but
yeah, we can get there later.
Yeah, I mean, he does his best to try to leave on a sort of high note, which is like, you know, for him, it's, I mean, I don't know. It was actually more than I expected, honestly, his tone of voice and what he says at the very, very end, like the last sentence or so of the movie. But we'll get there when we get there. Let's see. A lot of things take place in this movie. Then we see more of the progression of the Chinese government just becoming more and more fascist, really, but the student movements also becoming really huge. And there was this particular woman who ended up becoming like kind of a huge figure in the student movements. I call them the student movements, but I mean, it was a big social movement, not just of students, but that's kind of the shorthand for, at the time. But, yeah, her name was Chai Ling. And I guess like she just accidentally fell into it. He tells her story like really quickly that like she went to like go have like a night of fun in like Shanghai or something, and
yeah, she was the one studying psychology, right?
I think so. And she was just a university student, and she was like probably I forget, raped, I think. And I don't really remember why he brings that up, actually, to be honest. I mean, I think it was to show that like even through this like horrible thing that happened to her, she ended up finding like this thing, inadvertently finding this movement that she like really dedicated her life to. So at the time, like, you know, the Chinese government officials were just like stealing like millions upon millions of dollars, and just, you know, just the corruption is like rampant. And that's a big part of what people are protesting against. That, and, you know, they basically want like certain democratic institutions in the country that don't exist. Like, we just want our wall back. I don't know. There's a really, again, he basically, like the whole point of her story, though, he focuses on this individual because she like believes like more than anybody in this cause, right? And there's footage of her like kind of like speaking to big groups of people and like getting them like, you know, riled up or whatever, like to push for this revolution, this change. But then there's this footage of her like in like a hotel room or something, and she's just like crying hysterically, and what she's saying is like, revolution is impossible, and I just pretend that for so long that it is because I don't want to let people down. And like, it's like, I mean, it's hard to watch, you know. So again, this is just Adam Curtis like kicking us in the fucking crotch, in the stomach, whatever. Just like, there was revolution in the air, and it all fell apart instantly. Moving on to another one. But like the kind of big important part of that whole section of the movie, I think, is he's saying that like individualism can't mesh with like collective action, and that's what like the student movements were trying to do in a way. They wanted to have like an individualistic, I don't know, philosophy or approach, but also we're trying to make like a mass change. And like the way I remember Adam Curtis describing it was basically that like you have to be willing to like actually willing to die to to really bring about like huge revolutionary change, I guess. So then we're getting closer and closer to the 90s here.
Time of the individual. War is over, and it's time for everyone to express themselves to their fullest and live out their beach dreams.
So he shows like, you know, the fall of communism in Soviet Union. In steps Yeltsin, this like ridiculous cartoon of a man who's just obviously like a hand-picked stooge by the United States. And yeah, this whole idea of like modern Russia, or I guess, you know, 90s Russia, trying to just like force this like ill-fitting suit of democracy and market capitalism like onto itself, and it just like creates so many bizarre problems. So he compares what's happening in Russia in the 90s, so this like attempt to like try really hard to like force something that's not there to happen, you know, democracy, capitalism, the free market, whatever. But then meanwhile, like in the US or in the West broadly, the actual sort of like big powers that be, you know, behind the government are saying like, fuck democracy. I mean, I should mention that the name of this episode is Are the People... What is it? Is it like, what if the people are too stupid?
But what if the people are stupid?
Yeah, but what if the people are stupid? And that's like where this kind of steps in, this idea of like, we don't need democracy, not you know, maybe we need like the appearance of it, but we don't need real democracy. Like,
and a lot of this is running, or a lot of the modern stuff that he's doing in this is at the same time that things like Citizen United and other things are about to be passed in the States to allow like businesses at least in the States, businesses and probably globally, way more control over what happens in politics.
Yeah. I mean, I do know Citizens United isn't until like, I want to say like 2008 or something. No, it's probably a little bit earlier than that, but it's in the 2000s. But anyway, you're right that is approaching, and like that, all of the stuff that's happening in the 90s is leading towards something like that for sure.
Oh, 2010.
Was it 2010? Yeah, I thought it was something like that. But
I was thinking of, yeah.
Well, I mean, so yeah, we're in the Clinton years basically, and but like he sums up the basic idea of what this change that's happening in the West, like after the fall of the Soviet Union. So it's kind of like, okay, communism's dead, so now we can kind of like do whatever we really want, and we don't have to worry about battling against that anymore. Even though, of course, like the U.S. is gonna like smash like socialist movements all over the world, like, or continue to throughout the 90s and 2000s, is even till today. They're doing it in Ecuador right now. But the idea is that yes, politicians should serve commercial forces rather than people, which is like, you know, it's kind of a thing that everybody sort of knows is what's really going on anyway. But like this was like an actual kind of turn to that, at least maybe more so than ever in the 90s. At least that's the argument Adam Curtis seems to be making here, is that like what happened in the 80s was it was just like shrinking the government's role, and like, yes, bringing in corporate interests and stuff, but that by the 90s it was just more explicit. It's just like, no, you're going to serve ExxonMobil and not, you know, Minnesota or whatever. This is more of like, you know, him saying that like this individualism that's like becoming like, he says like the sort of high point of individualism is the 90s, in the Clinton years.
It really felt that way.
Yeah. And he talks about how it corrodes the collective power of democracy, rather than, because people a lot of times see this idea of like individual freedom as going hand in hand with democracy, but there's much to be debated there, I guess. So yeah, Clinton just like hands the keys over to banks and just, I mean, basically banks, but like other, multinational corporations, and not just the American ones, of course. This is a international endeavor. But yeah, that's like Clinton's whole legacy, at least. That and all of the tough on crime shit that comes up a little later too. But
I mean, crime got so much better because of that, luckily.
Crime better?
Like that. So much better. It went underground, you might say.
It became stylish. Tupac, remember? We're going to get to Tupac. So in Russia, like the way that Clinton just sort of said, like, okay, rich people, essentially, super, super wealthy people, here you go. You're in charge now. With all kinds of stuff. I mean, like the Glass-Steagall thing, repealing that, like that basically led to, the 2008 collapse. Just all the deregulation, blah, 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 blah. Just more and more power handed over into the private sector. Privatizing prisons, privatizing military groups, and so on. But in Russia, a sort of similar thing was happening, at a hyper pace. So like really quickly, Yeltsin he was always a puppet from the beginning, but like the oligarchs in Russia just like owned him like really quickly. Like they just completely took any power he might have actually had, and put it into their own hands, and so Russia is basically becoming corrupt in the same way that we see China becoming corrupt earlier. In the same way that America was becoming doubly corrupt, I guess. I guess the only difference is that there was no even close to successful revolution in the United States. Like it just kind of just kept getting worse and worse and worse. I mean, I guess you could say like people tried some stuff in the 60s, but like it didn't really amount to much. That's not to say like it's totally worthless, but whenever like old hippies like to say like, man, we stopped the war, like, no, you didn't. That thing fizzled out on its own. Like all of the anti-war stuff was like done by like 1970, and like Vietnam didn't end until 75 was like the last troops getting out. I don't know. I've just never really. I mean, they shed light on a lot of stuff through those actions, but it's a little grandiose to say they stopped the Vietnam War, I think.
Very much so.
Yeah. One interesting fact Adam Curtis brings up about like the this sort of insane period of transitioning from the Soviet Union to like modern day Russia is that the life expectancy fell from, I don't have the ages here, but just in 6 years, from like 1987 to 1993, life expectancy of the average man fell like a significant amount of years. I think it was like 8 or 9 years and that's pretty significant for only a 6-year period. He doesn't really get into like what the cause of that might have been, but I mean, he's clearly trying to connect in some way to this, I don't know, this like country becoming like a ridiculous, corrupt joke. And then there was this big, Yeltsin, like, yeah, he just at the request of these like crime families, basically the oligarchs, he like dissolved the whole parliament, and there was like they were like tanks, like shooting at the Parliament building, with the support of Bill Clinton. We get back into this guy, Limonov, the kind of strange novelist guy who, like, he escaped the Soviet Union, went to America, and became like disillusioned with America. Then ended up writing a book,
the Eddie book, right?
Yeah, a book about how fucked up America is. That became like
read that book. No one would publish it in America, but it got published. Like, did it get published in Russia?
It was a hit there.
Okay.
I mean, and understandably, because I believe the whole point of the novel is like America is fucking disgusting. It's like obsessed with money and profit, and like everyone is miserable. I think that was basically his point. And he ends up moving back to Russia, I believe. Yeah. He also ends up doing some really fucked up shit that's not cool at all.
Yeah.
But he's seeing all this shit happening in like the 90s, and he calls it like the geopolitics of money, and he doesn't like it one bit. And he sees the way to fight against this is to just be fiercely nationalistic. And he ultimately ends up creating this group. I think they call themselves the New Bolsheviks, which is kind of a shitty thing to steal from the Bolsheviks. But they have like their symbol. Let's just put it this way. Their symbol is like a hybrid of the swastika and the hammer and sickle. Like, he somehow thinks he can blend like Nazism and communism together. Or he doesn't say Nazism specifically, but I mean, it's like fascism. And like, it's obviously supposed to, like, they're wearing like these red armbands with a white circle and a, hammer and sickle inside. Like, it looks very reminiscent of Nazis. And I think they still might be around. It shows them around like I think even during like almost maybe around the same time as like Pussy Riot. I don't know. They're on trial for their whatever fucked up shit they were doing. And yeah, they're like Zeke Heiling and stuff. But I don't know. He's a weird guy. I kind of want to know a little bit more about him. I'm just curious. And the book, I am sort of curious about that book too. There's a couple of books that this documentary made me want to check out.
Yeah, me too.
And getting closer to the end of this.
That wasn't on his name. My name. I thought the name of the book was My Name Is Eddie. It might have been something else.
It's just something like that. It's like It's Eddie. Something Eddie. Yeah, I don't remember exactly. So then we kind of skip ahead to towards the end of the 90s in England. And this is like the age of Tony Blair, basically, which is like, it's just kind of like, I mean, to put it really simply, sort of a Clinton-Bush hybrid of politics in a way, I guess. Because he was obviously, I mean, the first time I even remember anything about Tony Blair was just how cozy he was with Bush and how much they saw eye to eye on the war on terror. And he goes into this interesting thing about how, like, when the UK was like losing its grasp on being an empire, which we kind of talked about last time, like when they got really when people got really sort of desperate to hang on to that, that's when they started conjuring up conspiracy theories that like America and the Soviet Union were collaborating to destroy England. So yeah, sort of more about that sort of like retreating into conspiracy theory stuff there. But then just so like the way that Clinton gave all the power over to the economic elites, I guess you could say, Blair does the same exact thing in England for the most part. Like, he gives like all economic power over to the Bank of England, which is pretty disastrous, I guess. It's like it creates like a lot of job losses, and the people pushing these policies just say, well, this is the cost of being part of the great global economy, which is like a thing you hear a lot. from the 90s onward. So then we also take a look at what the European Union was up to, and like they basically had all these like technocratic ideas that are similar to what I was just saying about like as the 90s begun, like this new era of like, we don't need voters, or we don't even need politicians, really. We can just control societies like with technology and with our, this core of genius people that mean well. And I forget exactly what his role was in the EU, but he was one of like the upper crusts, whatever, like top leaders in the EU. And he said like, he used this weird term that just basically means fascist when you break it down. But he said the EU can govern as non-majoritarian bodies using rational scientific decisions. And the people who would be making those decisions would be banks, different like intelligence agencies and so on. But yeah, non-majoritarian bodies. It just means like a concentrated group of people in control of everything. So that's kind of terrifying. And but yeah, again, this is just like more another example of the way the winds are blowing, I guess, in the 90s. And Adam Curtis goes into the war in Kosovo, which was like a UK-US joint effort to just bomb the hell out of the Serbs. And Tony Blair thought this was like a great triumph of like neoliberalism, basically. And then this weird thing where it goes full circle is the Doctors Without Borders founder ends up becoming I didn't look this up, but the way it's said in the movie is he ends up becoming the new ruler of Kosovo. Did you catch that?
I did not catch that.
Yeah. I think I actually had to rewind it to make sure I caught it. But yeah. So like it starts with him and the Vietnamese refugees, and it ends with him. And as much as we're like saying we're fans, like there are certain things that I can criticize for sure. Like certain threads are left hanging in a way that's like, sometimes I get the point of it, but I don't know. Like that one, I would have liked to see a little more explanation for like why he even mentioned that. I guess I just have to look into it myself, but
well, he is the 15th most influential Jew in the world, and the whole thing is about conspiracy theories.
The
Bernard Koechner.
Right.
Koechner?
I don't know. A Doctor Without Borders.
If you've been listening to me for a long time, I fuck up names.
I like Doctors Without Borders. I think I've mentioned them on the podcast that I think they're a good
he ended
group.
up becoming the like UN representative in Kosovo.
Okay, but he describes it as the new ruler of Kosovo. I just pictured him like just having this little like being like a king of a town or something.
He was like build him a little palace, give him a scepter, give him a doctor's scepter with a stethoscope at the end of it.
So what did you think of like episode 4?
I thought it was interesting. I think it was the one I might have been the least focused on, and I'm not really sure why when I was watching it. But I did like when it got into the Clinton stuff, which it did briefly.
Yeah, I remember getting a little bit of a thrill, like this is my shit. This is where I came of age. Something like that. I was also just curious to see how he would talk about the 90s and Clinton. He doesn't really go into it too deeply, but I mean, he summarizes it pretty well, though, what the shift is. Like, I mean, that's the thing is he doesn't really go into deeply about any of these particular cases, but like he summarizes them pretty well and makes the connections well, I think. So, yeah, episode 5, Jiang Xing committed suicide in 1991 before she was she'd been sentenced to be executed, but like I think she was like on death row, so to speak, for a while. But she committed suicide. And another huge shift in China is that Xiaoping's rule was, I mean, China was obviously becoming more and more powerful as like a capitalist force, just selling tons and tons of shit to the West at like a huge profit. And of course, like, you know, probably creating a lot of miserable lives in those factories. I'm pretty sure you can say confidently. They showed some footage of one of the factories, and like it looked like probably one of the nicer ones to work in. And I was just anytime I see factory work, I just imagine like how I don't know. It seems like a horrible job. I mean, you've done it. You've been a factory worker for brief
I have
periods,
been a factory worker,
right?
At multiple factories, and
where you're
my
like
experience
literally doing the same, like.
Yeah, I mean, when I worked at the car door factory, I was literally doing like I worked at a factory where I was the guy who installed the like rubber strip along the edges of the car door that keeps it from like keeps it sealed when you close it. So I would just like pop it into it's like rivets, divots. Rivet divots. English, Jason. You teach it. Why don't you know words? And for 8 to 15 hours a day, we often worked really long shifts, and I had to like meet a quota because I was on the line.
Damn.
So it was like, got to do like 100 doors a day or 200 doors a day. You just like lose track of it though. And this was like, I'm fucking old, but I think this was like before smartphones. When I worked at this factory, it was before like smartphones were normal. And it was also like before iPods were normal. So you're just, I mean, I guess it was a factory. They probably wouldn't let you stand there with headphones in anyways. In my head, I would have been a lot better to listen about it. I would have just been against the rules altogether because they don't want to make that type of work better for the employee.
Yeah. I think that would be like the only way I could do, like I've done monotonous jobs, not factory jobs, but like office jobs, I guess. Like, and I'm not talking about like anything as glamorous as like answering phones and actually doing paperwork. We're talking like literally like through a temp agency. Once I had a job. This was in Austin at like some just anonymous soulless building that I didn't even understand what it was. Like I didn't even know what kind of business, or it was something for the city, but like I just like would rearrange like stacks of paper. That was like my job. But they let me listen to stuff on headphones, and that's the only thing that made it tolerable at all. Yeah. Without that, I don't know. I think it just sounds so terminally miserable. So, yeah. I'm all for the automation of those kind of jobs. There's no reason I mean, there still might be things we can't get around technologically, but like, I don't know. I'm anti like sometimes when I hear like even politicians I like or generally like Bernie Sanders, like, all the factory jobs have gone, and I'm like, well, can't you just get better jobs? like or when people say like, oh, the robots are replacing us, I'm like, that's good, but only, and I understand like, so like, okay, like better example would be like the misery of like those coal mining towns we talked about before. And like when those just shut down and everyone has no work to replace it, I get why they would want those jobs back. But like,
well, I mean, factories, like if they got rid of like line work, which I think a lot of line work has gone away, like the really monotonous stuff that I think you're talking about, where you're just like
like putting like caps on toothpaste or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of that's, I think, been more automated, but I think factories will always need like trained people to some degree, like people that come in and fix the machines, etc.
You think they'll need people to fix the machines and like supervise the robots?
Yeah, I do.
But not even always either. Like I can imagine supervision AIs or whatever. I mean, and maybe that's, you know, it could be for the worse, but like I'm just saying that like I think like that's not really a quality life to be. I mean, and that's no offense to anyone that does that kind of work, but like it's like I guess what I'm trying to say is that like if you are of the leftist bent at all, like the end goal is like automate the shitty jobs and like everyone else can have like the fun jobs and like follow their dreams and shit. I mean, it sounds utopian, but it is. I mean, that's kind of the point.
I can finally live my dream of never working again. But honestly, I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm a teacher. It's hard work. I
mean, there are easier jobs, but I know what you mean. Yeah, when I see the footage of when I saw that brief footage of it was people like they were like testing TVs like in this film in China. Yeah. And I was just like, that's what they're going to do for their whole life till they die. Like, that's the kind of thought that went through my head. And it was like, it just really bummed me out. But, anyway,
my best factory job was I was like a janitor at a factory for a year. And I actually kind of liked it. That's right. At one point in my life, I lived the janitor life.
I mean, I would much rather do janitorial work than be on a factory line.
I had to give it up though because I started getting like terrible nosebleeds and got real sick because like when I wasn't cleaning and I had time for leaning, I was supposed to just like hang out in the broom closet full of cleaning chemicals.
Oh, good God. I thought you were going to say you were like snorting pills.
No. I would just hang out in the broom closet and I would read like shitty fantasy novels or whatever because I was allowed to bring books to work. So I would like just sit there and read. And like a lot of, I mean, like there was like maybe 2 or 3 times a day in my 8-hour shift that I actually had to like go and like clean and do stuff. Like there was the emergency cleaning. That always sucked, you know, like when someone got ate by a machine.
Oh, damn.
No, that actually never happened. That shit.
Oh, you said 8. I thought you said hit.
8 by a machine. No. But yeah, apparently sitting in a really small closet full of like bleach and other cleaning supplies for 6 hours a day is not good for me.
Yeah, it seems like it could be no good. So episode 5. Yeah, so China is like on the rise, I guess is the simplest way to put it. One part I found interesting, I don't know if you will remember this, but this is where they get into the thing about like sort of like feeling like wanting revenge on England for the Opium War. But they like, how does it happen? So, shit. This is where my notes are kind of letting me down. So I put dodge the issue, but I don't know what issue I'm referring to here. I think like the government dodges the issue of like, hey, we're just becoming like capitalists like the West, by like just basically deflecting and building up this like anti-UK, anti-US in a way, but more anti-UK sentiment about the Opium War. And it's largely like factually accurate. Like the British did obviously like weaponize opium in China. Like that's irrefutable, but they kind of took it to like even less factual levels, I guess. But then they made this huge propaganda movie. Do you remember this part?
I do.
It was like, and it was like maybe even till this day, I bet some Transformers movie has probably beaten it by now, but like, well, that's not a Chinese movie, but you know what I'm saying? It was like the most successful movie in China for like a long time. I think it was just called Opium War or something like that. And they also made like a early computer game where you like fight the evil British opium peddlers, all as sort of like propaganda, even though it's based in fact, but it was basically a distraction technique in a way from like all the corruption in the government at the time. And then he goes on to talk about like sort of the flip side of the Opium War history, and that in England people were starting to feel guilty about it. People that didn't really have anything to do with it, but still, it was under the name of their country. It's like their people, whatever. But he describes this interesting thing, how their guilt mutated to fear. And it turned into this whole like anti-Chinese, and probably more broadly like anti, in the way that like people in the West just don't draw much distinction between Japanese, Chinese, and Korean people. It was like the yellow menace, basically, like this fear of China, like coming to get, like basically to get revenge for the Opium War shit on the UK. And this was like expressed through like a bunch of novels, like these like kind of like pulp fiction novels, like these just shitty bad novels about like the Chinamen like stealing our white women and that kind of shit. And then also the movie Dr. Fu Manchu, which is about like an evil Chinese guy, I guess. I don't know. I didn't look into it really. I mean, that's just a ridiculously racist character. Probably by any standards, but maybe especially today. Social unrest in the U.S. There's the L.A. riots. Everybody knows what that was about. There was this interesting thing in the U.K. with the Birmingham Six, which I didn't know about. There were 6 people that were completely innocent of any crime, and they were being charged as basically like terrorist murderers. And after, I don't remember how many years, but a long time, they got released. And in the film, they show one of the members, like understandably, like angrily, like screaming into this microphone to the crowd of people. And this crowd of people are like supporters, but he's like explaining how all of these fucking powdered wig motherfuckers in the UK legal system like just didn't want to admit that they were wrong, and even like the prison guards and like the lawyers and everybody would just say to them like, we know you didn't do it, but we're gonna treat you like you did. And like so yeah, this is, it's just more sort of social strife, and it's just showing like this sort of decline in the UK. Like he talks about how the intelligence agencies are like a joke. Like they couldn't even foresee that the Soviet Union was going to collapse, and were like shocked when it did. So there's like United States and United Kingdom like exceptionalism myths that are really strong in both places. And because things are sort of like falling apart and exposing that that's a myth, and there's nothing exceptional except in a shitty way about those countries, that people begin to just sort of retreat into the past. And that's where like the title of this episode comes from, the lordly ones. So yeah, like the whole, this idea of retreating into a sort of fantasy, and this idea of living in a fantasy realm, like, is a big part of this whole movie.
Big part of the series in a way. Like episode 5, but like there's.
No, the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay.
And he goes into this whole thing about how, yeah, just the way that some of the specific retreating into the past came about. And it was just like people imagining this this time that didn't even ever exist in reality, but this sort of I guess like almost like feudalistic times in England, like in the English countryside, and people just like happy to have these people lording over them. Like, oh, our lordly ones, they're so wonderful. They treat us so well. And it's just
Makes me think a lot about how people are reacting to Biden being a president.
yeah, just like being soothed by like a parental type figure. Yeah.
It's just we don't have the boogeyman anymore. It's so good to go back to normal. It's so good that we can be in the 90s again. Whatever.
Yeah.
I think Adam Curtis might have been aware of that, though. You get a strong sense.
Well, his parallel with the U.S. Going into a sort of fantasy land is the re-emergence of the KKK at like the 19 teens, whatever you call that era.
Yeah. When they make the movie, that fucking black and white movie, the
Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation. I don't know why I couldn't think of its name all of a sudden.
Yeah, and like what I found interesting about that too is that the whole like what we know is the KKK, like the burning crosses and the hoods and shit, like that wasn't part of the original Klan. That all came out of this era of like retreating into a quote unquote better time. A time when things made more sense, when a white man could just be white and in charge all the time. But like he said that all of that symbolism shit came from an old novel called The Klansman, which was actually just copied from like some Scottish novel that had all of this stuff. And I don't know, I just found it kind of funny that, I mean, obviously that KKK has done a lot of seriously fucked up stuff, but like they're also so stupid and absurd. Like they're just like, they're doing a kind of just cosplaying shit, you know? It's literally from a fucking fantasy novel. And from the movie Birth of a Nation, like they were basically copying what they saw in the movie. I guess the movie wasn't really drawing from the real, at least from like the robes and the stuff like that. I don't know. Maybe that seemed really shocking to me in a way. Maybe it's not true, but that's what he said. So yeah, I mean, another big important thing is how the UK, they meddled in Iraq before the US did, like 100 years before, or almost 100 years. I forget exactly when this was. I mean, it was when it was still the Ottoman Empire, and like this people in the UK just like decided, oh, we're gonna go make a country called Iraq. I mean, in so many words, that's what they did. I mean, to summarize it quickly, like all they did was they didn't understand anything about the place. They didn't understand like the power structure there, and they put the sheiks into power, or the sheikhs, as I don't know. Is that a British pronunciation, or am I just saying it wrong?
I think it's the sheiks.
He said sheikhs, but I think it's he also says Jang instead of Jiang. So that's just his Britishism. But and they were just these kind of like out in the wilderness kind of guys. And like the actual cities and stuff were like very modernized and like, you know, but and then they realized like, oh, we can't like control this place. Everything we did is fucked up, and they just left, and like they just left it all fucked up. Sounds like kind of familiar, like what's going to happen again and again with people intervening on that country.
Intervening on all of the Middle East, but yeah, Iraq specifically and Iran. I mean, didn't like even before, this is not in the movie, but like I kind of had this understanding that like a lot of the Middle East before, like a lot of the meddling in the 80s was actually like developing a slightly good like tourism industry, et cetera, and like, you know, I don't know, just like way more habitable before we started bombing them and like, you know, upending their governments and structures of power once every 5 years.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the U.S. did a coup in like the early 50s in Iran and damaged it quite a bit, and then continued again in like after the revolution in 79. But yeah, this thing that happened with the British going into what would become like modern day Iraq. Like that was way back when. I forget exactly. I want to say like the 1920s, but I'm not sure.
I just realized the 1920s was 100 years ago.
Right. Actually, speaking of like, overthrowing countries and like just doing coups all around the world. Like, so first of all, the UK is like retreating further again into like, fantasy shit with the sort of advent of James Bond and like romanticizing their like intelligence communities, which sucked. He said at one point the MI6 was mostly just full of communists. They couldn't sniff out the communists in their own like I don't know, next door agency. Like they were just totally comically inept at that point. And so yeah, the US the US uses like this. I mean, I guess the CIA just does what it wants in a way, but so they even call it like the dual state, which is when you're overthrowing countries. And like the stats on that, it was actually surprisingly less successful than I thought in a way, but actually makes sense now that I think about it. But he said in the movie that they overthrew 66 foreign governments and succeeded in 26 of those. It means like we just leave places in shambles, like so much worse off. And like the successful ones are, I mean, I don't know exactly what that even means in that context, but he talks about like going to the Congo, and like the whole point, like underneath anything that was being said, was just to steal natural resources, which was copper. And yeah, it's like the same fucking song and dance they've been doing forever. I mean, it's only been like 100 years basically, but man. So yeah, just destabilizing governments and putting in like brutal dictators. So then the first time America meddles with Iraq was in 1963, and the stated goal was to overthrow the communists that were there. But the Ba'ath Party, like before the US's hired guns or whatever could like do this coup by themselves, the Ba'ath Party just like destroyed the communists. But then the US immediately sort of like supported them. And who was in charge of the Ba'ath Party? That's one Saddam Hussein, good sir. And yeah, that's when we liked that guy. They even went as far as to give him a list of known communists in the country, which helped them to kill thousands of people.
I remember, I've heard about that in multiple places, and it always kind of annoys me.
Just annoys you?
Just annoys me, angers me.
And I mean, so like a couple more examples of, I mean, like the rest of this section of part 5 is basically kind of a couple more examples of this meddling around the world. And yeah, I mean, like, I think his point is that the US and the UK are not even like, well, they're pretending, but they're like barely concealing the fact that they're just anti-democratic. Like everything they do is like opposed to democracy, including in their own countries, and like as equally or worse in other countries. So in 97, Xiaoping dies. So that's the end of an era in a way, but not really. Cause I mean, China just kind of continues on the same path after that, except it just gets worse. It's a theme. It only gets worse. I remember this story from when it happened when I was a kid, and I remember thinking, what the fuck? So in 99, I think, maybe it was 98. Either way, it doesn't matter. This was when England returned Hong Kong to China. You remember that in the 90s?
Of course I do.
What Adam Curtis points out is that in like the negotiations, like before it happened, the UK insisted that's like, okay, we'll give it back, but you better make it democratic. It better be run like a democracy. Despite the fact that the UK ruled it as like a fucking vicious, authoritarian, racist regime with no even pretend democracy there. And it's like, that's, and like the Chinese people in power were like, the fuck are you talking about? Do you see how you've been running this place for like 100 years? No, we're not going to give it fucking democracy. And there's some really weird footage of like the ceremony when it's like they're handing back Hong Kong to the Chinese, and I think Tony Blair's there. He must be. And like the British guy who was like the fucking, I think they called him like the governor of Hong Kong or some shit. The guy who was like running the city, maybe he was the mayor. I don't know what his title was, but they had like all these like little Chinese kids like singing songs of praise to England, and like there were commenters like on the TV footage of this, British commentators being like, while they're happy to have their like freedom again, you can tell they just love us so much. And like they're saying it without any irony. They're like, they love England so much. Look at how they're singing us beautiful songs. And like there's just, I don't know, just these idiots like waving goodbye, like, oh, we did such a good job here. There's an important thing that happened. It's like this huge financial collapse in 1998. It affected Korea actually quite a bit.
That's the IMF, right?
Yeah. It was like mostly the people that got hit, the countries that got hit the hardest were like, I just shorthanded it as Southeast Asia. It was like, I want to say like Thailand and Malaysia and a couple other countries in that region, and then Korea. But like China was completely like fine. And I wrote down this thing that Adam Curtis says, and I don't know if I can wrap my mind around it completely because I don't understand like this kind of finance shit, but I get the basic gist of what it means. So he said like after this happened, and this is now like China's new leader, they sent back every American dollar to the U.S. in order to buy up U.S. government debt, which made the dollar rise in value, which made Chinese goods even cheaper, which made lower U.S. interest rates, which made U.S. people borrow more money from banks, which caused them to buy more Chinese goods. And this protects China within the global economy while the U.S. can live in like its dreamlike state detached from reality. He described it as like putting like a protective barrier between like China between itself and like the rest of the world, like in an economic sense. And it seems that that's what's happened. I mean, but again, I don't know much about that kind of stuff. And then,
No, that was one of my favorite comparisons in the movie when he was talking about the way that we're kind of like this cycle of just because there's no drugs in China, there's this continuous cycle of them making goods that we buy, borrowing money from us, then we buy their stuff, and it's just like this weird, just like yin and yang of us feeding off of each other's despair almost. Or enabling each other, I guess. Enabling each other is...
Yeah, I get what you mean. I think it's towards the end of the movie, he kind of says that, like, I mean, this is when he's saying, like, well, this is possible and that's possible. But he says one of the possibilities is that China is actually not as strong as it seems to be, and that it's just using its kind of security state. And, I mean, it does have economic, like, clout for sure, but, like, he says like it's possible that it's all kind of like posturing and the whole thing could fall apart just as easily as anywhere else. It closes out the episode with the with Bush. We get to see GW, and there's no sense in talking about the history of the Iraq War. But there was one little part that I didn't know about where he's actually showing it more from like the sort of British point of view, which I guess as an American I didn't really see much of before. But like he says that Tony Blair, the kind of moron that he was just like 6 different historians came into his office, like sat down and explained to him like in like simple terms he could understand like how terrible it would be to send troops to Iraq, and he just like went like, duh, Saddam is bad and like dismissed them. And then I guess like people in the intelligence agency, British spies essentially like told him about like WMDs, blah, 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 blah. And that's like what he wanted to hear, because he wanted to do what they did in Kosovo. He thought they were going to be like great liberators and that people were going to love England and so on. And he, this is the first time he makes a sort of comparison right at the end, I think, between the rise of Trump and Brexit. He kind of like sees them as like one and the same in a way. Just expressions of hopelessness. Yeah. And just like reaching for anything to like,
well, I mean, some of the like despair stuff that leads up to that, where he's like showing the scenes of the opioid crisis and just like people without jobs, and like he chose some really great footage for that. But like I've seen some of the, I'm sure other people have, you probably have too, but I've seen people just like in those throes of despair. I think that's why I get so angry that it's like near impossible, it seems, to get help for anyone. It was like I've had family and friends suffer through just like just the lack of like systems out there to like help anyone who's not like in the ruling class.
Yeah, it's no good. No good, really bad, fucked up. Yeah, that footage you're talking about it's at the end of the movie, kind of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was watching that and I was like, what is this footage? Like, it almost seemed not real at first.
I've seen footage or I feel like I've seen shit like that, and just like,
but it's just so many,
my small city in Johnson City.
It's so many people all in the same area, like nodding off while standing up. Like it looked almost like a stage play, or I don't know. I'm not saying it was, but like when I was really kind of, I was like, what am I seeing here? Like I got what it was supposed to be, but like I was like, is this real? Like it almost looked.
I think it definitely is real. Or I've seen scenes exactly like those scenes.
Yeah, I guess people do like manage to like, people can like nod out while they're still standing, which is kind of insane to me.
Sorry, I jumped forward too much.
No, it's okay. I'm just realizing this is like going on much longer than I expected, and like my notes on the last episode are like 10 times more.
Oh, I mean, we can just go forward some.
Yeah, there's a bunch of good stuff in the last episode, though.
That's true. People can watch it.
That's true.
We're just here to share the good word of Adam Curtis.
Yeah, we'll just try to go through this quickly, more quickly.
Yeah.
There's this. I think we could skip over all of the Tupac stuff. I get what he's saying about it, but it seems if I was going to cut anything from this movie, that might be it.
Well, I love that he gets into the Illuminati and music video stuff later.
When he gets to the end of the Tupac thing, that's the payoff. But like a lot of the stuff before that, I mean, it's not like it's bad, but it just, I mean, I liked it just as like a, looking at that time and like thinking, like the way he kind of describes Tupac as like torn between these two things, like revolutionary and then like sort of like, I don't know, like icon or whatever. But anyway, I'm saying we that's one thing we could probably like zoom by in a way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, he talks about how Tupac's mom was a revolutionary, and like this would sort of like be imparted in him in some ways, but like ultimately fail. Again, it's him saying like idealism, then watch it die. And in the case of Tupac, like literally, but like in any case, he goes into Saudi Arabia being this like also land of total fantasy and like kind of nihilism. Abu Zubaydah? That's his name, right?
It is.
He talks about, so he's from Palestine. But then he like, I guess, moved to Saudi Arabia, and he just like hated it for these reasons. Like he felt like this sort of emptiness and how nobody really believed in anything except for money. And he gradually sort of turned towards like jihadism, I guess. And but he also was keeping a diary, which comes back later. I mean, ultimately what's revealed through like all these like twists and turns is that, you know, he gets unfairly blamed for like being like colluding with Osama bin Laden, and ends up in Guantanamo Bay, and he's still there. And it's really horrifying actually. He goes to like a sort of training camp in Afghanistan, and at one point like some sort of mine explodes, and like he gets shrapnel into like directly into his head, and it like kind of alters his personality. He doesn't really have many memories. His memories are all like fractured and detached, and he starts writing them down in his diary as well. And like the thing about the whole significance of the diary really is that it's used against him in an insane way to like, he ended up being waterboarded like 100 something times maybe. Because people were just reading, he couldn't explain himself either, because like he's basically got like brain damage, and it's just gruesome, horrible shit. But they're like, he ended up like confessing to things that he didn't do that like led to nothing. Of course, I mean, this is just things that we know already, but like, the way that Adam Curtis like shows us his whole life, like leading up to that is I think really well done. Then there's some parts that get a little more sort of like philosophical. Like he goes into like so he starts going into like science and like how scientists are trying to like look at society and like look at the human mind, and like he goes through chaos theory. And I mean, chaos theory is obviously like this complicated thing you could talk about with the mathematics and stuff, but like it all like as related to politics, at least the way Adam Curtis describes it, it says that like every revolution is doomed to fail because of chaos theory. And then there was like this antidote sort of theory, complexity theory, that said that there's underlying order and patterns at like every level of existence, like from quarks to thoughts to societies. But this sort of just creates like an obsession with like technocratic solutions. Like, oh, well, if thought and societies and matter and everything, if we can find the laws that govern it, well, then we can control it. And it goes back to the whole behaviorists thing of like,
try to see people's emotions in their eyes.
That and Skinner, B.F. Skinner,
yeah,
gets brought up. He wrote a book. I don't know where it is in my notes now. I think it was called Walden 2. Yeah, and it's like basically his idea. It's like his idea of like a behaviorist like utopia, which is essentially what like China is becoming, at least the way Adam Curtis describes everything in this last part of the documentary, where like there's a few social engineers and like mass surveillance, and it's not just like surveilling you. It's like, do you remember that part where it's like showing like how like,
oh yeah, I've read about like how China surveys you. So China basically like face tracks everything at this point.
yeah, and it's like to the point of like it's reading your emotions through, and
They base credit on it. Like they can up and down your credit score in China based on,
that's the creepiest shit. Is like,
which
oh,
I'm
you made
surprised it's not in America yet, but kind of is in America already. If you I mean, it's not being ran by the government, but companies like Google and Facebook, they literally always know what we're doing. And a lot of like what's been advertised to us, probably what you buy to some degree is dictated by the device you carry around and things that are getting pushed to you without you even realizing it's being pushed to you.
for sure. I think that this Chinese like technocratic utopianism though is like, it's like a few levels like amped up from even that, because it's like, or at least the dream of it. I don't know exactly how much of this has been like realized yet, but what he was showing in the film, and it was, you know, I just don't remember how much he was saying is like real, or if it's just like what is being developed, but it's not quite done yet. But the idea was like, yeah, like, oh, you got angry in this social interaction, so we're gonna punish you by like deducting 3 like emotion points, and that means you have like less money to spend. Or like, oh, you had a good social interaction, what we deem a good social interaction, here's some extra widget points. Yeah, it's really, it's scary, weird shit. And like the way that some of the behaviorists describe it is just like, there is no like you, like you're just sort of this conduit, like you're part of this system that we're controlling, basically. And like it's not necessarily even like, it's not like an evil mastermind like rubbing his hands together. It's like some of these people really believe like this is the way to like order society and to create like a utopia, but they're fucking misled, in my opinion, to say the least. There's this important concept too of how, so because like I mean, I guess radical politics or revolutionary politics is like been so sort of snuffed out, like it's moved more and more just into the realm of culture rather than real politics and real power. And that definitely speaks to me and hits me in a way that seems really accurate. Like there's this kind of, I don't know, like truism that you hear sometimes, like, oh, well, like liberals control like the culture and like, you know, Hollywood and the media and stuff like that. And like, that's just like liberals, you know, so like socially liberal people, not like actual leftists. But, and then in like the realm of politics, like everything is basically dominated by conservatism. So I don't know. And I tend to think that's true. Like, although like the two sort of wings are like, at least when it comes to like political decisions, like very similar, as we've talked about a million times. Like Democrats and Republicans aren't nearly as opposed as we're supposed to believe they are. But I do see the like culture politics split in a way, because it's like if you keep like those kind of politics like in the cultural realm, they're kind of impotent. Can't really do anything. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if I'm making any sense. But he goes into that at some point. I'm hitting the brain fog here now. He talks about sort of like the advances of neuroscience, which is kind of interesting because it's basically like going deeper and deeper into human thought, but like as easily ordered components, I guess. I mean, I think he doesn't actually use the word free will, I think, ever, or determinism, but I feel like that's a lot of what he's actually talking about, is that people's sense of free will is being eroded by science, basically.
Sure.
And I see that in a way, but I also know that like the average person doesn't like worry about whether they have free will or not. I mean, even like the most
I find that it's usually best not to worry about it, as weird as that sounds.
Well, yeah, I mean, what are you going to do about it anyway?
Exactly.
I mean, just like cards down, like I don't think it's real, but I live as if it is. But like if you really want to get like down in the intellectual nitty-gritty level of it, like it falls apart as like a concept, in my opinion. But I mean, maybe there's a deliberate reason why he doesn't use it, because he doesn't want people to think of it just in that kind of like dorm room session, like philosophy talk. But I don't know. I ended up just kind of thinking about it that way towards the end of the documentary, like when he's talking about people being helpless, and like because he's bringing in the science of like computers and of neuroscience, and like those are things that are like showing more and more like how we are, you know, parts of a system rather than sort of free agents. And that's a sports term, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
We'd be remiss not to talk about Google, the invention of Google he gets into, and how basically the arc of Google is he presents it as like it did start off as like an idealistic thing. Like they showed an interview with one of the founders. I don't know their names, but it's like two guys, right?
Larry.
And he's saying like, you know, everybody can access the information. It's like, you know, it's democratized.
Yeah, no, I mean, their original slogan, I guess their still slogan is don't be evil. I don't know if don't be evil is
wait, don't be evil
Alphabet Inc. or not. But yeah, and then they were doing, I mean, for the most part, try to do that, but then they had to figure out how to make money. And, you know, it's really easy to make a lot of money when you're running everyone's email and you search results. I guess the search results came first. And you're like, well, we know what people are searching for, so we know what to sell them.
Right. He described it as like when the tech bubble burst in, was it 2000? I think.
Yeah.
Like Google was kind of one of the big, and they weren't even huge at that point yet at all. Right. But, they were left standing, like they weren't destroyed by the bubble bursting, and all these venture capitalists just like swooped in and were like, hey, we can like make fucking tons of profit out of this thing. And they were like, all right, we want to be rich. And yeah, it's exactly like all the stuff you're talking about, like data mining and targeted ads and beyond. I thought it was interesting too how he brings up how the Patriot Act, like, what was it? Like Google is basically like, I feel like they were in some trouble with the government for something. I forget what, probably, but this was around like 9/11, I guess. Or like right before. And then basically the Patriot Act in 9/11 like saved Google because the government was like, oh, we can use your tech to like surveil everybody. I mean, I'm really oversimplifying it, but that's what I remember the point being in the movie. Which I didn't know that at all. I didn't know that was like Google's origin story. He gets into Putin, which I found was interesting to me just because I didn't know very much about Putin, honestly. So in so we talked before, like the 90s in Russia just became like more and more of kind of a ridiculous joke of like fake democracy. He describes it as, or someone described democracy in Russia at the time and that time as a curse and socialism as meaningless. And the only thing left was like everyone fending for themselves, which meant like the oligarchs were like in control of the country. And that's like where Putin steps in as like he's handpicked by the oligarchs and
as the man who believes in nothing.
Yes. Adam Curtis says that phrase about Putin several times, and it was like chilling me to the bone, because it was like footage of Putin looking terrifying. Like he believed in nothing.
That's what he believes. He believes in nothing.
I thought maybe he had. Like I said, I didn't know. I guess I just didn't know much about him. Like I thought maybe he had like an ideology, but it sounds like he totally doesn't. Like his ideology is just like power, like commanding power, but he's not what like the stupid Russiagate fucking idiots think he is, like some puppet mastermind, like trying to reinstate like the old communism. Like he's not that at all, because the oligarchs definitely don't want that. But there's this point that he brings up when like there was a submarine that's sunk, like tragically, like, killed a bunch of young men, and like the families were demanding like answers and justice, and like Putin was just kind of standing there silent, like not giving them anything. No one was helping them out, and however it went down. But then eventually like Putin just came out and just like said like, your problem is not with me or the government. Your problem is with all these criminals, the oligarchs. So he like turned on his own people that were like kind of backing him, it seemed. I don't know. I don't really know what the like long-term significance of that was. I think maybe it just meant to be like Putin kind of seized like power independently and would like, I have written here, he harnessed the anger of common people and still believed in nothing, which I think is a paraphrase of what Adam Curtis says. You can skip over this part. There's a really specific story about just how insanely corrupt modern day China has become. Just Putin. Just one more note on Putin. He created a society mirroring himself. It too believed in nothing. See, he said it so many times.
Why is Adam Curtis so against Russia? Also, I loved that Putin had like this crazy Russian motorcycle gang declare itself as his bodyguards, because that reminded me so much of like MAGA, more than like just about anything I've seen in a long time.
They're like more organized and way more scary.
Whoa.
But I know what you mean. I'm just saying like they're like a serious version of that. Like because there were the bikers for Trump, but they were such pussies. They were like the bikers who love cops, you know, like, hey man, we fought Blue Line and all that shit.
The same bikers who recently beat a cop to the death.
Well, I guess I don't know if that was the same people, but yeah, that footage of the giant biker rally, because it wasn't just like a biker rally, it was like in like a huge stadium, and there was like fucking pyrotechnics and shit going off, and there was some like translation into English of some of the shit they were saying, and it was really fucking like Sieg Heil fucking nationalist. The Night Wolves. They were called the Night Wolves. They do mention Pussy Riot a little bit, which I think I might have said out loud something like, yeah, Pussy Riot's here. It's like finally something kind of cool. Yeah, then we're getting towards the end here. Like they bring up the Tupac hologram at was it Coachella,
Yeah, they bring it up. That was at Coachella 2012.
And he mentions how Tupac's final album was called Killuminati.
And it was released post-mortem.
Yeah.
Right? Post-mortem means I'm not an idiot. Help me. That's the word for after death. That's all. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, post-mortem works. But it was, and he said that it was about him like lashing out against the black community for like living in a fantasy world and not, banding together and creating revolution, which I think is kind of interesting as his last record. And so the end of the movie, he gets right into right up to the modern day. He brings up COVID kind of briefly. I mean, I didn't expect him to go deep into it anyway, but he brings up COVID and Trump and QAnon briefly, and the opioid epidemic we were talking about. He shows this really upsetting footage of people just like all nodding off, and looking pretty miserable. He also brings up that Google AI thing. I forgot about that till he reminded me in the movie, but
I kind of forgot about that too until it had like this scene of like flowing through like the picture of the dog as it like reconstructed itself. And I was like, oh yeah, that was really cool at first.
He describes it as like this terrifying vision of reality. He says, so like they made this algorithm that was supposed to, like the algorithm, I guess, was supposed to spot dogs, like anytime there's a dog visually in some whatever, like an image or something, I guess. And but they like ran it backwards, and it just made all images started turning into dogs. And yeah, he lets it run, and like it's kind of. I mean, I was watching this at like 6 a.m, and like, I mean, after having not slept all night. So by the time we got to that, I was like, wow. What does this mean? Dogs are everywhere. It made me think of that Pulp song too. He also again says, it reflects that everything means nothing, basically, like everything can be anything, which makes everything mean nothing, something like that. And he leaves us with 3 possible futures. Where can we go from here? Well, he says one possibility is that individualism will disappear along with individual freedom. And that's the scenario where we just become like literal cogs in the program, the behaviorist Chinese surveillance style program. So, I mean, I wouldn't choose that one. The second one, he said, would be, and this is the first time we see Biden in the movie. And remember what I said in the last episode? Like I said, what if he ends the whole thing with Biden will be our hope for the future? And like as soon as I saw Biden come out on the screen, I was like, no, did I predict this? But he's not really saying that at all. He says some people think that the future will be like the past, meaning, we'll go back to like the Obama days or whatever. I mean, I think that's what he's intimating, but he says like, but that's unlikely because there's all of this discontent, and like, you can't really just go back in time, et cetera, et cetera. And then this third one where he like ends the whole movie with is that people will imagine new, never seen before ways of living. And
Star Trek.
What?
That's the joke. We're going to finally get to living like we're in
Star Trek. Yeah.
Once we figure out how not to work and how to like produce unlimited amounts of
he
food.
says it has to be new though as well. I don't know what, but I know what you mean, like the utopian Star Trek.
That's the dream.
And he says that what that requires is that individuals like have confidence in themselves, which he thinks is, something that's been beaten out of a lot of people, which is probably pretty true. But it does end on a sort of a vaguely hopeful note, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. It does like suck because like the movie does such a great job of just pounding into you that it's like every revolution is corrupt or failing. Like or it might start out as good and then just like it just gets beat down by the system. Capitalism.
Yeah.
Power. I don't even want to say capitalism. It gets beat down by like power just like making things bad.
Yeah, he doesn't like focus totally on economics. But
I think he's bigger than that in a way.
Yeah, it made me realize that like, I mean, he's certainly like somewhere on the left spectrum, but like, I don't know what his actual like political ideology is. Because he doesn't. Sure. I actually between the last episode and now, I started watching some of his other documentaries, and like one of them is just all about the failures of communism. I mean, the Soviet Union specifically. But I don't know.
Which it had many.
Well, for sure. I'm not saying it didn't, but it makes me think he's probably not like a Marxist Leninist or something. But
yeah. You have final thoughts about it?
I think it's a really good movie. I think it gives you a lot to think about. And as bleak as it is entertaining in a way. Like if it wasn't, like it would have felt like a real fucking slog, but like it didn't feel like in 8.5 hours. And I mean, I've already started rewatching some of the episodes.
No, he's a master at just like editing together his footage with like his narration.
Yeah.
And it's pretty incredible.
It's also, but yeah, it is. I mean, even aside from the content, there is sometimes just a bleak feeling I get from like even just his visual sense. Maybe it's because it's using like so many different like styles of like film stock from like over the ages. I don't know what it is, but like the first time I tried to watch Hypernormalization, and I say tried to because I started to just feel really like almost like sick to my stomach watching it in a way. I don't know. I don't know why, but I was just not in the mental space to handle it. But it was like almost immediate, like just from like the first couple of shots of the movie. So it wasn't even like what he was talking about. It was just something I got from like just in my bones kind of feeling. I know this doesn't sound like I like it, but I'm just saying I can see people reacting negatively to it and then maybe in the right state of mind really enjoying it, which is what happened to me. That's what I'm trying to get at.
I get that. I mean, he goes into kind of heavy topics.
And the music is very like melancholy usually, like the original music, not the like the stock music that he uses, but like the original like kind of just droning synthesizers is like, I mean, it works really well, but it's like it's sad. Anyway, I don't know why I'm getting into like little details at the end here. I feel like I've just watched the whole movie again.
I want to watch it again, and I have not watched it again yet, but I will, because I feel like I need to pay attention to episode 4 a bit more than I did. I missed a lot of it, I think. I don't know why.
I think the 6th
brain was just like not latched onto it as much as the others.
Yeah, I mean, it all kind of blends together for me, but like if I'm looking at my notes here, I think the 6th one is like, I think maybe just because it's the longest, the last one is the longest one. It's a whole 2 hours unto itself. And I don't know, it just has a really strong ending, I guess is what I'll say. Really, like, we went through it, but like I skipped the only episode I skipped over a bunch of stuff in probably was this 6th one. But anyway, this is all inside baseball shit.
Yep. So
snip, time to edit.
It's getting late, so should we give recommendations? Should we make plugs?
I'm just gonna continue to recommend this movie because I'm tired as well, and I don't have anything else in mind. But if you want to say something, go ahead.
I recommend. So I was looking at the Wikipedia of this movie and at the soundtrack. Actually, I might recommend just like listening to that on Spotify. I'm sure it's on Spotify because he does choose really great music for his movies.
Yeah, I heard there's already like independently put together list on Spotify.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. There always is.
There was one song, I think, sung in German, I want to say, and I have no idea what episode it's in, so the only way I'm going to find it again is by watching all 8.5 hours again.
Episode 3?
Maybe. I think...
Because I think me and you were talking about it.
Did we? Oh, okay.
Because we both thought it was a bit, like, absurd in German. Like, to hear it in German.
No,
like
there was
Elton John song or something.
No, it wasn't that. It wasn't that. I remember that too. And maybe it's not even in German, but there was one particular song that I really liked and I should have taken note of it, but I didn't. It must be in, anyway, I'll find it somehow. I can't get on Spotify, man. It's fucking annoying.
It's really weird.
Maybe you could find it for me.
I'll look.
It just said it was a really cool song. I don't know. I'm spent. But oh wait, you just recommended something.
Yeah, that was the recommendation.
Okay.
So my other recommendation is check out our website at heatdeftpod.com. And if you like what we're doing, or if you hate what we're doing, recommend us to a friend. You can either tell them, hey, you might like these guys too, or hey, you might like to talk shit about these guys too. I mean, either or. One is preferable, but we'll accept either.
Yeah, feedback is nice. Did you say Twitter?
No.
We're on Twitter also at HeatDeathPod.